This is Metallic Penguin. You can think of this kind of like a podcast. There's no real need to look at the video here. It's mainly just because I need a video component for YouTube to put it on, your computer screen or your phone, as it were. This isn't my normal content. It's a issue that I happen to care a lot about, which is basically our privacy, which is one of the main reasons I'm on Linux in the first place. Okay, please to enjoy. Starting in January 2027, the state of California will mandate that every operating system in the state has a way to verify age, maintained either by a third party or by the company providing the operating system with an API. What that means for the Linux community in particular is pretty much terrifying in the state of California. Lots of people who use Linux don't want big tech tracking them. I can recall switching to Linux as a daily driver, seeing on my Google News these horrible stories of all the crimes that people were using Linux to commit, as though if you're using Linux, you're condoning this criminal activity. This needs to stop. I also will tell you, can attest, that basically every time I need to log into my bank, I have to have a conversation about how I use Linux. Nowadays, they don't hit me with, well, why aren't you using Windows? As in, what are you trying to hide? But, this is a thing that we in the Linux community need to realize. This law that California is basically rolling out in 27 is being looked at by the state of Colorado. And I think people in the Linux community need to be out front with this. I really do, because I think this is going to open up a huge can of worms that, frankly, we need to address head on. We're basically creating a corporate surveillance state. And I think it'll be too late by the time people realize what's going on. In order to talk about the California age verification law, if you'll pardon the pun, as mature adults, I think the first thing we need to talk about is what we're using computers for in the year of our Lord 2026. Now, every adult who has any contact at all with children, specifically girls, even if it's contact because you know their parents, would certainly have stories about girls being approached online or something like that, or let's not be sexist, even boys being approached online. And certainly with the revelations coming out of what I'm going to call the E-files, if you know what I'm talking about, that seem to come out almost daily. These are very, very prescient and very, very real concerns. And I'm not saying they're not. I, however, wonder a lot about the California age verification laws when it comes to operating systems. I wonder if that's entirely what they're intended to do, or if there's a darker purpose afoot. Let me ask you a question. How many 13-year-old children are purchasing computers without their parents' knowledge? I would argue not many. If you're of a certain age and you go around in the world, one thing that strikes a lot of people now is that you see less and less teenagers working. I'm talking now to the young Gen X and the early millennials and the boomers out here. we can all remember teenagers working in fast food or, somewhere, the video store, etc. You don't see that anymore, which means a lot of young people, don't have a revenue stream that isn't connected to their parents. And a computer, for a lot of people, credit lines notwithstanding, is a significant purchase. And even with a credit line, it would be a purchase that you would know about because you'd be paying it every month or, a couple of months or whatever, right? Whatever the case may be. And then so imagine my surprise when I noticed on the California age verification law that they would legally require operating systems to track the age of the people logged into the computer as young as 13. Okay. Let me ask you a question. What do we use computers for in the year of our Lord 2026? For me, I turn my computer on. Most days, I'm either catching footage or, planning a shoot or editing. On occasion, I'll read something or bank or whatever, but, the point is that's all going through services. Right? So what would be the non-nefarious, or I guess on the side of angels, reason for an operating system to catch my age? Well, then that brings to another question. Why do they need my age? Or don't they already have it, I should say, because Microsoft, if you have a Microsoft account, which Windows 11 and presumably Windows 12, 13, etc., is going to start requiring Microsoft accounts to log into Windows. And it's been a while since I've had a Microsoft account, but I seem to remember that you couldn't have one without also having your credit card attached to it. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have a credit card, doesn't that automatically make you at least 18? So then that brings up another question, and I think this is the deeper question. What type of future do you want to live in? Let me ask that again, because it's a profound question. What type of future do you want? Do you want a future where a few tech oligarchs know absolutely everything about you, especially when you consider that having made websites off and on for years, once a website gets enough traffic these days, it can pretty much tell you the age of the people logging into it. Google Ads can certainly do that. Having run Google Ads in the past, Google Ads can certainly do that. So, if, say, Microsoft or, say, Apple wanted that age, couldn't they just get it? I mean, doesn't Microsoft have Bing? And I know Bing doesn't have the search volume that Google used to have, but it's surely got to be picking up. And the other thing that strikes me is how unenforceable this law is, because nowhere that I've ever been on a computer, except when I had to verify a YouTube account and when I had to verify Google Ads, have I ever had to provide ID. And I really strongly believe that if you started mandating photo ID to log into your own computer in your house, there would be a revolt. An honest revolt. And then that brings me to this question. How many computers does a person use in a day? And where are these computers located? For example, a 13-year-old goes to school. Okay. Does that school not have computers in the library? Whose ID is going to be on those computers? Is it going to be the librarians or the IT professional's ID? Are you going to start holding the IT professional or the librarian legally responsible for what a 13-year-old boy might go search for in the library? How far do you think that'll get in the court system? I'm just asking. Again, I just have questions. The other question I have is, and this is as a Linux user, is this going to make Linux legally uninstallable in California? And of course, all this is fun and academic right up until they start enforcing it. You know, America, it strikes me, has had a history and a run-in with laws that it never actually intended to enforce. Arguably, you could say prohibition was like that. I mean, everybody of an age remembers Napster, right? And plenty of people remember, downloading one or two songs, or maybe not one or two, but, whatever. And technically they broke the law, but they were never sued. Now, having said that, as an adult, I've actually talked to people who were threatened with serious jail time for downloading songs as a 14-year-old. But again, and that gets us to this question. Was this law intended to enforce equally? I don't think there's an adult in cyberspace that thinks it was. And I think pretty much we can all agree on that. And I also think, quite honestly, that this law was written by people who have no idea how an operating system works, or how many computers a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old might run into in a day. And really, you're not technically interested in capturing the 13-year-old's ID, right? Because they wouldn't have one in the first place. You're technically interested in capturing the adult's ID. But the question becomes, which adult are you going to capture? Right? The adult who purchased the computer, or the adult who set up the computer? And then, I guess the overriding question that pretty much everybody should have kind of immediately is, let's presume that this wasn't done for nefarious purposes yet. Let's presume that this was done simply as a way to have an ironclad idea as to how many people of an age live in a house that you can pump ads to through their operating system. Because that's actually what this is. They want to sell you ads, or show you ads rather, through your operating system. And they want a pretty good idea as to, is the ad effective or not? Well, it strikes me that people living together often use the same computer. It also strikes me that, and again, when you legally start requiring everything with an operating system, so you're talking refrigerators, you're talking light bulbs, you're talking thermostats, you're talking all the things, you're going to have a good idea as to who makes the technical decisions in a household, which might give you a good idea as to who earns the money in the household. And maybe that's what you really wanted. So is this surveillance via capitalism? I think is the real question. I think the real worry here is that they won't uniformly, enforce it because they basically can't. They're going to pick and choose who they, slap with this. And the thing is, as big tech, worms its way into the pockets of more and more politicians, you're going to get more and more arbitrary. And also, a lot of these politicians apparently haven't really thought this out, and they haven't actually thought out the fact that Linux is the backbone of the internet. It's the backbone of enterprise. And if you're picking and choosing who has to comply, that's going to seem more and more arbitrary. And it's just one more, chink in the armor of our society and of democracy. One of the hallmarks of authoritarianism is that it basically enforces things unevenly. And I'm really afraid that this is a piece that is going to evade the detection of most people. Even most people who would sincerely be deeply concerned about this. And it also fits, I think, into the wider piece of more and more surveillance capitalism generally. Look again at the huge push of having, certain websites. Right now it's mainly porn websites, but the precedent is there. Certain websites have to basically maintain IDs in certain states, and right now that's porn websites, but it's there. The precedence is there, and it's a way to nuke commerce, and it's a way to basically stifle not just civil discussion, but also civil society. And I think that's something we need to think about. Anyway, what are some of you guys' observations about this whole thing about having to register your operating system or having to register your age in your operating system? And do you think I'm off base here? Do you think it'll be sort of this weird thing of we're going to ask you to pick out some numbers, but we're not really going to jot that down. We're not really going to store that anywhere. Or not. Alright, once again, this has been Metallic Penguin. And, like I keep saying, you're lapping everybody on the couch. Alright, everybody. Bye-bye.